Oh,
Okay.
okay. Hi.
Hiya.
So you can hear me?
We're good.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So I have a question,
Yep.
if that's okay. Or it's kind of a couple questions. So one is about praying from the heavens. I don't fully understand that because I think I'm still learning actually what that means to pray from heaven, being
Mm.
there. And then my other question is like when I'm interceding for somebody and I want to pray in the spirit. So if I just picture that person that I'm praying for, and then I'm praying in tongues because I don't know what I'm praying, then I'm praying for them. Is that correct?
Okay. Well, let's answer the first question first. When you say praying, that has a view from an old perspective that you're asking God to do
Right.
something, and effectively, that's not what we do when we're seated in heavenly places. We're not asking him to do something, we're doing something inspired or motivated by his heart. So as sons, we're no longer asking dad to do things for us. We're maturing to the point where we begin to make decrees and declarations and call things into being and assign angels to situations because we have the authority to do that being seated in heavenly places. So it's very different from God, help, will you do this, or will you bless that person, whatever. We release blessing over the person, or we release what we're called to do. So it's a very different process and a very different thing. In a sense, when you're here and you're not in that realm, then you're sort of asking God from that realm to do something into this realm. But when we're functioning in that realm, then it's our responsibility to make the declarations and decrees and to operate with the authority we have to call things into being as we're led. And it's important to only do it out of the heart of God. Otherwise we can run into issues where we're doing things because we want that to happen, and that's not a good thing. We need to know the heart of the God before we then do things out of that heart. Now we can do them as sons creatively, and we can do them individually as we feel led to do them, but we're motivated by his heart. So that's never going to be to produce something negative,
Mhm.
or it's never going to be to bring bad things on people or anything like that, because what God wants is to release life, not death in anything. Um, so yeah, it's knowing your identity as a son, being seated in authority in the position within the realms of heaven on the throne, and then to administrate from that position. Um, Intercession is the same sort of dynamic. We're not looking to be here and then intercede for someone somewhere else here. We're looking to stand in the realms of heaven and administrate there. Now, there's obviously a limit to what you can do on behalf of somebody else,
Mhm.
um, because it depends on really whether you've got the authority, a mandate given by God to do it or not. If they're within your governmental spheres of authority, let's say your family or whatever, you can administrate into that sphere, but you're calling again forth God's purposes for that person rather than, you know,
Mhm.
that we know what we're thinking and therefore we want this to happen or that to
Right.
happen. So we need to look into their scroll or connect to their scroll of destiny and call that forth. And, a lot of intercession, I used to sort of see some intercessors, whatever, and it felt like that they were trying to manipulate God to do something by wailing or crying or travailing. And if they wailed and cried hard enough, then God would respond. And it isn't like that. You know, we don't need to twist God's arm. We just need to know his heart. And then you're in alignment with his heart, so then you're outworking that. You know, so for me, that's a very different process. If you are, as you say, well, I'm visualizing someone and I'm praying in tongues, praying in tongues is usually directed towards God when we're in this realm. When we start to mature in the realms of heaven, I find that my spirit is often speaking to my soul when I'm speaking in tongues in one sense, and that is communicating something in a language which is beyond, you know, my normal language. But it is quite a different change of perspective once we know the authority we have and what we can do from that position. You know, so I think being seated there is the first point, and when you're seated there, you need to know who you are to be able to administrate effectively, because it's an identity issue. Am I a son? If I'm a son, then I have the authority to operate as a son, and therefore my position as a son enables me to outwork that position in the kingdom with a governmental authority. And, you know, we don't have to go through all of the sort of intercessory jumping through hoops that you used to do. Often interceding on behalf of someone can be taking that situation to the court of heaven and dealing with it from a perspective of legal authority, and getting a verdict that then outworks that into the earth. Again, it depends really on what level of authority you have.
So yeah, so for me, you know, because I'm learning, I don't believe I'm a son yet because I haven't gone through the responsibility. I'm just starting like at the first love gate. That's where I'm at. So maybe I'm not able to pray until I'm to that point, because I feel like I'm called. I mean, I know like God called me to pray for this person, but because I'm so used to the old school, I'm trying to learn what is God's real way for me to pray, because it's not like you said, the old. So that's why I thought, well, if I just pray in tongues, because then I'm out of it.
Yeah, well, I think that would be better than trying to do it in your own understanding, in your own mind.
Yeah.
The key would be engaging in a relationship with God in which you can ask him. That's why learning to hear his voice is so important in the whole process. Because if you can go to God and say, okay, what's your heart for this person? Show me what to do.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
That's the simplest perspective, because then you just do what he says. You know, and then we don't have to try and work it out or fathom it out or understand it. We just have to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. All right. Anyone else got anything they want to talk about? Any questions?
Mike, I have a question about personal mountain and the corporate mountain. I had an experience in the past where we were exploring personal mountain with like mentor person, and then she later on turned it into corporate mountain as a bench, and bench was dismantled, and so I'm wondering how to distinguish that, and I wasn't clear how we were doing personal mountain, and she kind of transferred to corporate mountain.
Cool. Okay. Well, everyone has a position where they're seated in their realms of heaven. And where you're seated in that position, that's your position of sonship. And in that position, there are various mountains of authority that you have. Each of them is personal. There is only one throne on them. That's how you really distinguish a corporate mountain from an individual one. There's only one throne on it for you to be seated. On a corporate mountain of authority, which is a position which is designed for something wider than just your personal life, then you will have three thrones sat on it to sit on, there on the mountain. So in essence, you don't need a bench of three or anybody else administrating your personal mountains. It's your responsibility, and anyone else who tries to interfere are only going to get in the way. That you can't turn your personal mountain into a corporate one. You may have authority personally to be involved in corporate mountains, but that's not your mountain. That is a corporate thing which needs a bench to function. So you don't really need a bench. You are the bench, effectively. Body, soul, spirit. You are the authority for your own life in that sense. So you can't turn something. Let's say I have a personal mountain, which is a sphere of authority that governs, I don't know, let's say legislating for a particular town. Now I have authority to legislate for that particular town as part of my own personal responsibility and authority. There may well be multiple mountains associated with that town that are responsibility of corporate things. There could be a bench of three for let's say, I don't know, the commercial aspects of that town, or the spiritual aspects of the town, or the environmental aspects of the town. There are multiple levels of authority that God uses. He doesn't give the authority to one person for everything. But you may have some personal authority. If you do, you don't give that responsibility away to anybody else. You administrate it. But you may also, because you have a heart for a particular area, that may also lead you to connect to other people who have a heart for that particular area, and then together you would administrate that as a bench for that area. But that's a sort of a different dynamics when corporate and individual things are in place. And so I don't believe you can turn an individual mountain into a corporate mountain, but you can be on a corporate mountain and an individual mountain, and that's okay.
So it's the purpose and the mandate that actually defines whether there's definitely corporate mountain, but it cannot be just one personal mountain turning into the corporate.
No, because it's your position. That's you. That's what you have authorization for. You may be part of a variety of other governmental spheres as part of your own personal mandate. So I have a mandate for my own life. I also have a mandate for our ecclesia. I have a mandate for the Joshua generation. They're specific areas that I have authority given to me to administrate. I do it from who I am, but then when there's a wider sphere, you have other people who are involved, and that then becomes something you establish. But you can't just do it because you want to. I think people get the impression that, hey, I want to be in government over my city or my town, so I'm going to establish a bench of three with some people to do it. Well, you have to be called and mandated with the authority to establish that with a particular blueprint specifically for what that is. And if you don't have that blueprint, then there is no mountain to be sat on in reality, because the blueprint opens up the areas of authority that you can be seated in. And I think a lot of times when something new comes along and people start to engage in the realms of heaven and do things like that, there is a little bit of a swing to, oh, great, we can do all this stuff now, and really we can't just do what we want. A, we need to know the heart of God, but B, we need to have authority, and that is given to us. And when it comes to corporate things, you need to be given the authority to establish things. Otherwise, really, you're just imagining it. In reality, you're just saying, oh, great, I've got this authority because I believe I have. We need the mandate. We need that mandate to have a clarity about what it's for. Some mandates are very specific. They're limited to a particular frame. Some are wider, but in general, you need to know. Otherwise, how can you use authority if you don't know what authority you have? And I think that's where a lot of people are just, great, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other. And really, it's just out of the desires of their own heart, which may or may not be connected to God. But make sure that you don't do anything stepping outside of the authority that you have or don't have. And you can ask God, do I have authority to do this? And if he says yes, then you pursue him. Well, how am I going to do that? And that may be setting up, with other people and working with other people. Usually, as an individual, we are a gateway of heaven into the earth. So we can create an atmosphere around us of heaven, the river of life, rivers of living water flowing through us, energy around our lives that's a reflection of our position in heaven. All of us have that. All of us have a gateway within that can flow into the earth around us. That's everyone's responsibility, because we're all a gateway of heaven and we're all a house of God because God dwells in us. If you're going to deal with an everlasting door, everlasting doors, which are over an area or a geographical area or a specific governmental area, that's really, I believe, you need to function as a bench. You need two others to be a foundation of the government for that. Otherwise, you get people trying to tackle things on their own, which they're not designed for.
So how would, because this other person kind of took over spiritually, how would you go about clearing that or resetting what has been done spiritually?
Okay, well, depends really on if that person is no longer involved, then they're no longer in the position of authority. Therefore, whatever they did, you can undo by declaration or decree, or if it's more serious, what's been done, you can do a court case to remove any of the accusations that misuse of authority might have brought, perhaps. Basically, you need a strategy from God to do it, to deal with it. You then need to make sure that your heart towards that person is right. You forgive them, you release them, you bless them. You genuinely want that, to do that. And then if there's going to be another bench established, then it needs to be make sure that you get a clarity about what that is. That's why there's no senior person in a bench of three. Otherwise, you just default to an old mindset of will prefer the pastor or will defer to the apostle or the prophet or whatever. And it isn't like that. It's mutual submission together. And therefore, you don't need one person to be in charge or to be responsible. Everyone's equally, jointly responsible for a governmental position, which is a bench. And you get people who potentially are used to being involved in earthly government, who try and outwork heavenly government in the same way, and they end up dominating or controlling or wanting to be in charge. And I've seen that with a number of people. They weren't willing to defer because they wanted control. Now, some of that was out of their own insecurity, and some of that was the need for that position to validate them. And it will never validate anyone. A position doesn't validate who you are. You validate the position, because that's who you are, and that's what the position is that goes with it, you know. So yeah, you've got to make sure that you clear away anything which is a hindrance and obstacle, and re-establish it. You know, I would, if it was a very clear bench for a purpose and you have a blueprint, then you re-establish that blueprint and you call people to engage with that blueprint and become a bench. Then you outwork that.
But I think it's very important that you mentioned that bench is supposed to be all coming together and there is no leadership and one person trying to take control over. I think that was very important.
Basically, you just be mutually submitted and you receive from each other that which you bring. And that might be different gifts, different redemptive gifts, different ways of operating, but you submit to each other with it. You honor and respect the differences, and you receive from each other. Like Jesus said, you know, you receive profit in the name of the prophet, you receive a prophet's reward. You receive the reward from each of the people, because that makes up the jigsaw. If you just got one piece, then you only get one piece of the jigsaw. And when you're a bench, you're only one of three. You need the other two or three to fulfill the picture and to have that government, because there isn't government without three. You know, so yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? Okay, yeah, you got your hand up, Anne.
Okay. Did the Lord tell you who to put on your benches and all the different benches you're on? Or did you meet with people and say, oh, this would be a good idea?
No, I wouldn't want to do anything like that with just being a good idea, because in essence, you'll just be, people are using new terminology, but doing it in an old way, and that don't work. You know, that's why it needs to be established. God needs to establish something for a bench to form around. You don't form a bench and then go and try and get a blueprint. That's the putting the cart before the horse. You receive a blueprint from heaven that enables you to have the frequency of that blueprint that will draw people to it. When you then have people who are engaging with that blueprint, you seek for God to reveal the bench. We didn't know any of that when we first started, and we didn't do it that way. And now we're resetting the bench to a more relational foundation, because if there isn't a relationship in the foundation, then you get structure without relationship, and that becomes dictatorial. So everyone's on a learning curve. You know, when we first looked at benches, you know, I asked God, you know, who should be those people, and then I approached them and said, look, would you consider being part of a bench? And we had a bench of 3 and a bench of 7. But the people didn't really want to function that way. So after a while, it wasn't working, because they were deferring to me all the time, and I didn't want that. So we went back and said, okay, let's all ask God where we should be. If we should be part of a bench of 3 or a bench of 7, let's ask him, which is what we did. And then there was a change in personnel, because one of the bench of 7 actually should have been a part of the bench of 3, and one of the bench of 3 should have been part of the bench of 7. And eventually it sort of evened itself out. But even that, you know, wasn't ideal. And when we then looked at the mountains that we have of authority as a blueprint here, we then asked people to go to God and say, do you feel called to any of these mountains? Some of them said yes, and then we responded from that. But even after that, after 7 years of learning how to do it all, we reset it to a more relational foundation, because there was something lacking in the relationship between 3 and 7. And if that relationship isn't as 10, then you have an us and a them. You may have a 3 within a 10 and a 7 within a 10, but if they don't see each other as a 10, then there'll always be an us and them. And we had that dynamic, and so we scrapped it and actually looked to establish with a group of people relationship, then to see a 3 and a 7 come out of that relationship. That's how I would do it if I was to have my time over again. Having, hey, here's a blueprint that God wants to establish. Who feel called to that blueprint? Let's engage together, relate together, honor and respect, create an environment of honor where we trust each other, have good, solid relationship. Then let's see what emerges to form a foundation. Then it will come out of relationship rather than we need a 3, we need a 7, let's appoint people. And you can take your time. It's difficult transitioning from something that already exists because there's already a existing structure of leaders. So how do you then transition from an old leadership model to a new leadership model? That's where the relational foundation comes in, and spending the time relating so that then you have a strong base to form anything out of. And it's not easy. It's so much easier to start from scratch, and I know of a group who did that. They felt God wanted to do something. They started meeting together. They asked for a blueprint, and then those that felt responsible for that blueprint established a bench of 3 and 7, and they outworked it relationally along the way. But it's not easy because of people. We're not perfected totally, are we? So we tend to have insecurities or needs or whatever, and those get in the way. So the process will highlight, without a doubt, things that God wants to change and transform along the way. That's what tends to happen. If you do that relationally with a culture of honor, then you can deal with those things together and learn to help and encourage each other and bless each other through a process that inevitably will happen. It's like it exposes stuff. It's what you do with those things when they get exposed is the issue. And if you can work them through in openness and honesty and transparency, help and encourage each other, then you grow stronger. And that ultimately is the purpose, is to have a very strong foundation of relationship that everything else can be built upon. Then that relational foundation will actually be the DNA that actually establishes everything else.
So you think everyone is meant to be on a bench of 3?
I believe everyone is governmental in that we are sons, and the likelihood is that would involve being part of something which was beyond just our own lives, but that's up to God, in that sense. I would be looking to learn to rule in my own life, be faithful with that, administrate that, live out of that, then start thinking about, do I have any wider spheres? Because some people I know have never learned to rule their own life, and they've just jumped into trying to rule over something which is beyond them. And actually it opens you up to potential harm. When we had our health mountain, there were 3 people who felt, yeah, we're called to the health mountain. Now, all of those 3 people actually needed healing in their own lives. So they were trying to take on the corporate responsibility for the health of a large group or a group of people, having never ruled in health in their own lives. They just got sicker because they tried to administrate something they had no authority in their own lives to do. Now, I would never go back and do that again in the way we did it. But we were just excited to find, hey, we've got all these mountains. Who would like to be involved? Let's try and do this. We had no idea what we were doing. And the subsequent damage and fallout of trying to do it in a less than wise way. So eventually we didn't just say, okay, great, you want to be on a mountain, great, have a go, because it opened those people up in a way which wasn't helpful. So in the end, all of those 3 people on that health mountain withdrew to establish health in their own lives and have some authority of ruling in their own lives, but then meant they had a testimony of ruling in the health area for other people. So, you know, you do find people jump in with both feet with a good intention, but not always with the best wisdom that's there. Take your time. That's the key for me in all of this process. Take your time, mature, grow, develop. God will show you if there's anything corporate he wants you to do when you're in relationship with him. But mostly start with Jerusalem. You know, it's our own life. Start with establishing the kingdom in us. Start with developing our own garden in our heart. Start with getting the gateways flowing. All of that then enables you to then have a testimony of how you are ruling, governing your own life effectively, that then enables you then to have some perhaps wider sphere of government. So that I think is the wisest way of dealing with this. Learn to rule in the little things in our own lives, then God will entrust us with more. But if you want to go for the more and you've never established the government in your own life, you'll end up falling on your face, because it won't work, and it will create problems one way or another, as it does. You know, so. Okay. Oh, Deborah, you got your hand up there. Yes, no. Okay, not saying anything. Deborah, you got your hand up? No? Nope. Okay. Lisa, you got your hand up then?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I'm at base camp, so there's an awful lot I still don't know, but I'm learning it. So I will probably have learned this 2 years from now, but I'm hoping you can give me a shortened version of how to deal with this. Our grandchildren are visiting for about a month. They're 2 and 4, and they really are prone to certain behaviors that are not ideal. And when they're at my house, I mean, they're kind of used to throwing fits and throwing toys when they throw their fits, basically. And that's more acceptable in their parents' home, which I respect. But when they're in my home, I know I have authority because it's my home. And I also know that they're 2 and 4. And so having a real intellectual conversation is probably not possible. I sense that there's something I could be doing spiritually in the heat of the moment when it's escalating and I can see they're about to grab a toy and try to throw it through a window. Something. And the parents don't want us spanking, and I want to respect that too. What could I do to communicate to them in a way that is positive and yet help to control the behavior that's just coming out of them?
Sure. It's a difficult one when their role model environment is not what you would consider what you want. So obviously you need to talk to the parents with a view of how, what discipline you are going to be able to use. I wouldn't want to be spanking anyone either. I think that whole whole scripture of spare the rod, spoil the child is a total misunderstanding of the verse. It's like God does not want us to beat our children. And the rod was not punishment. The rod was correction, guidance, like the shepherd's rod that kept the sheep from falling over or whatever. Nothing to do with beating anyone with a stick or spanking them. Again, completely wrong view of God, and therefore a wrong view of that whole doctrine. But I would talk to them. If they're coming to you for a month, then, you don't want a month of misery. So, you got to say, okay, look, how am I going to discipline? Because you got to be honest and say, look, the behavior that they exhibit is not acceptable in our home. So how you deal with that? Yes, you can rule your own environment. So you can administrate peace, and you can decree and declare peace, and you can create an atmosphere of peace, and whatever you do in correction needs to come out of love and not anger, which is quite hard sometimes when they're sort of pushing your buttons and behaving in such a way that it frustrates you and creates an emotional response. 2 and 4 obviously is quite a difficult age to deal with if they've had no discipline in their own environment. So whatever you do, you need to do it in love. The easiest way to do that initially is to remove one of them from the situation and hug them, and bring them into a place of safety and security. You got to be consistent in what you do. You can't be one thing one day and the next day not. So you've got to decide how you're going to do it and stick to it. And at 2 and 4, speak to their spirit. Their soul may be in the way, but I would be speaking to their spirit, and speaking to their spirit in a way. You don't have to do it out loud. I would speak over them while they're asleep. I would be speaking into their spirit, calling forth their spirit to begin to rule in their lives, overshadowing their soul. There's stuff you can do. Some of the situation is a difficult one. We have our grandchildren come up regularly. I had 2 grandchildren down at the weekend, but their parents discipline them, in the right way. So it's really easy for me just to say, no, I don't have to raise my voice. I just have to say, hey, can you not do that? And they've learned to respond. When they don't have any boundaries, you have to put boundaries in. So, talk to them as well. When they first come, sit them down, and actually they may only be 2 and 4, but you can talk to them, and you're talking to their spirit. You're also talking to their soul, and you can set the boundaries out, and once you've set the boundaries out, then when you then do something about it, you can say, do you remember, this isn't acceptable? So start with, I'm not going to let you throw toys around, hit each other, do whatever they do. Set the boundaries when you start. You can do things from the realms of heaven in terms of you're ruling your environment. So don't have a fear, have an expectation of peace, and administrate peace. If you're in fear of what's going to happen, then the likelihood is that fear will just create the environment where it happens. But it's not an easy situation. We have one grandchild that does have meltdowns, because I think they're sort of on the spectrum of find it very difficult with sensory overload, and sometimes just can't cope and just melt down. Well, we basically will just hug them until they come to a place of thing. We won't try and in that situation bring any discipline in, because all you do is inflame the situation. So sometimes you have to pick your battles of when you're going to actually try and deal with the situation, or just remove someone from the situation and hug them until they calm down, then you can deal with it in a way, you know, always try and deal with it in love, you know, but it's not easy. You know, I don't envy your situation. Yeah. We've got 5 grandchildren, and sometimes we have all 5 of them. Next weekend, I've got 3 of them I'm looking after for a couple of days. And, you know, I will be there. I don't have anything else to do. So I'll do things with them. You know, I'll give them the time that they need, you know, and we'll do things together, which means they don't just do whatever they like, you know. But you know, I've got good relationship with them. We have good relationship with them in that we can say no, you know, but it's how you say it often.
Right.
You know, don't try and never do it out of anger. You know, really, I think that's the key. Yeah.
So in the midst of their fit that they're in, and obviously I'm taking away a toy that they're about to hit the other person with or through a window, I could send my intention towards them spiritually to try to disrupt the cycle that they're in. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And while they're asleep, I would be declaring and decreeing peace over them, blessing, because while they're, and also make sure your heart stays soft towards them by continually forgiving them and releasing them. Because just because they're kids doesn't mean that we shouldn't forgive them, because what they're doing is unacceptable. You know, so make sure we continue release forgiveness, release love, and then while they're asleep, minister to them, send their angels to minister to them while they're asleep, bringing them to a place of peace and rest, and calling forth their identity, which may not be going on in their own environment, but you do have the authority when they're in your environment to bless them. And the blessing is that they will come into the security of knowing who they are. They won't need to, you know, hit anybody else or demonstrate any of that. They can be secure in who they are. Call that out, call it forth. You know, you've got a great opportunity to bring them to a place of that, you know, where that environment begins to change them. Because ultimately, children need boundaries to feel safe. And if there are no boundaries, actually, they're looking for boundaries. That's why they misbehave at times. They're looking for attention. If we give them the attention that they need without them needing to misbehave to get it, that gives them a safe, secure place to be. You know, I wish I knew what I knew now when we had 4 children at home, because I would have done things probably a lot differently than I did. But we've got 5 grandchildren, and now we do have the opportunity of doing something slightly different with them. You know, my wife is much better at the sort of, I guess, creating an environment where, you know, they're given undivided attention. You know, I'm not always able to give them undivided attention when I'm at home because I'm doing other things. But the next weekend, I'm going to have to give them a lot more attention because I've volunteered to do it. And I can't call in any reinforcements because my wife and my daughter are on a cruise together. So 2 daughters and my wife are on a cruise. So I got to look after them for 2 days. So from that perspective, I will be legislating for the whole week to set an environment where peace is dwelling and resting, and you know, and often take them out, you know, get them out of the environment that is just there all the time. You know, I'll be taking them out and taking them out for a walk and taking them out to, you know, somewhere where they can run around and they can let off their energy in a way which is not violent towards one another or any other property that you might have. Yeah. But yeah, So yeah, and I appreciate it's not an easy one to have, but it is your environment, and I think you do need to administrate it from a place of rest. So okay, yeah, Paulette.
Yes, I have a question. There is a lot of conversation in regards to addressing people spirit to spirit. And I'm kind of a very practical individual in that I would like to know a little more clarity in regards to that.
Okay. There's different perspectives to it. We want to have a relationship with people that is more than just on the soul level. So we want to be connected to them because we are connected to them in God. So he's in us, we're in him, he's in them, and they're in him. So there is a sense where we can connect spiritually, which is not at a cognitive level. So some of the cardiogenosis, heart to heart, spirit to spirit communication is done not necessarily consciously, or, you know, I am going to communicate with that person's spirit. You want to be open spiritually. When I go to a place to teach, I open my spirit to everybody to draw from me what they need. So I'm looking to engage their spirit, or allow their spirit to engage my spirit and draw from me what they need. And then my spirit will direct me down the rabbit trails that are going to answer some of their needs, because I've connected to them spiritually. There is a sense where you can minister to, in a ministry setting, it's different, in that you're maybe looking to engage the person's spirit to come to a place of rulership that then enables the soul to be restored or reintegrated, because there may be hidden parts, altar parts of people that are in fear or hiding, and they need a safe environment, and the spirit needs to provide that safe environment for the soul to begin to be made whole. So, you know, you can speak. Arthur Burke has got a whole book, I think, about speaking to the spirit, and you can call the spirit to attention. You can direct, you know, and that can be done out loud, but it's better done in the mind, because obviously you don't want to effectively speak to the soul. And as soon as you start speaking out loud, the person isn't going to know how you're speaking or why you're speaking. They're just going to hear what you're saying. So I do it in a telepathic way, if you like, with my mind to their spirit. And in ministry, you know, you do whatever you feel led to do, you know, and that might be calling forth their destiny, calling them to reconnect to their destiny. You can also speak to the altars of the soul as well, you know, and direct to the particular altar a invitation to come into the light, or come and engage with peace, or whatever you might feel led to do. So there's a lot you can do when you're connecting with somebody. I think sometimes spirit to spirit is at a non-verbal, non-cognitive way that is beyond language, that is earthly, and happens because people are open to it. You know, and again, you can't force onto somebody on their spirit. You can't make it respond, or make them respond. You got to create an environment which makes it easier for them to feel safe and loved and accepted, so that responding spiritually is much easier. You know, it's harder when the environment is such that they're on guard, which, you know, is depending on where you are, what environment you're in. You've got to be careful of how you do what you do, you know. And, you know, sometimes it's better to create a safe environment by legislating for it that then engages with someone in it. Obviously there's no distance in time and space either, so you can engage someone's spirit in the realms of heaven. You can engage from the realms of heaven and engage. Often, if I have authority in an area, I will overshadow somebody with my spirit and encompass them with my spirit to create a safe place that then I can communicate with them in the spirit realm in that way. So, you know, there's a few different dynamics depending on what you're looking to do. You know, quite often my spirit in the realm of heaven engages with other people's spirits and encounters them. Most of the time that isn't even cognitive for me, but for them it may be, and we have a conversation where they will describe what we were doing in the realms of heaven, and I'm like, oh, okay, you know, because I don't need to know what my spirit's doing most of the time until I do need to know. Then I'll find out, you know. So, you know, there's multiple levels of spirit to spirit communication. You know, we've all come out of God, you know, so we all have something in common. We're all light. We all had a role. Sometimes you can connect with people that you've known before you were here, and something in your spirit connects with their spirit, and this goes beyond the physical realm to the eternal realm. And there may be connections that we have with people that go beyond that. You know them. You know, you don't know them from a conscious cognitive sense, but you know them because you've interacted with them spirit to spirit before you came into this realm. You know, and those bonds are quite strong. You know, and they open up a revelatory connection that's very different from trying to connect with somebody here that you're doing all the work towards. You know, essentially there needs to be really two working together in a lot of things for it to be that sort of deeper relational connection.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Jill. Yeah. Okay, there you go. You go. Just unmute. There you go. You're unmuted. Yep. Okay.
Oh, is that me?
Yep.
My was cutting out. So what that conversation made me think, how can I set the environment for my family, my husband and sons, they're all grown, who aren't believers or walking with the Lord? I never really considered that before, but how can I, do I set up the environment to draw them to the Father or Christ?
Yeah.
Without words.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have the authority to create an environment of love that would draw them to engage with love, which is the nature and essence of God. Again, you know, there are things you can do, like at night when they're asleep, releasing forgiveness over them, that then sending the Holy Spirit or angels to visit them in dreams. I mean, there's all sorts you can do to administrate that. But ultimately, it's about helping them to connect to the reality of who God is. That might need you to deconstruct some of their religious mindsets that may have been created from the religious environments that they've been used to. Because God is not what they think he is. You know, and therefore, sometimes being open and saying, hey, I need to apologize on behalf of Christians and actually myself when I try to maybe manipulate you into engaging God, or try to use fear as a tactic, or any other wrong view of God. What they need to know is who God really is. A loving, accepting Father who's in them already at work, not outside of them trying to get in because we've told them that they're separated from God because they're sinners. You know, that's already been dealt with. God has already reconciled everyone to himself. We're the ministers of reconciliation. And actually what we've been is the ministers of separation. We need to become ministers of reconciliation and reveal the reality of that to them and help them to discover the reality of who God is, because once they do, they'll want that. We just made it really unpalatable to what be a Christian, to the world, and we've got to change that, and the reality of changing that is being real and being honest, and I think demonstrating what God is really like by demonstrating a loving, accepting way of treating people, not a, we want your behavior to change and you're not good enough, therefore I want you to become a Christian because I'm going to get an easier life. Some of it can be very selfish motivation in some of the things we do. So, I think, develop a real honesty with them and evaluate, why they've not found that they want to engage with God. Maybe it's they don't want to engage with church, or the religious image of God that they're not really wanting to engage. If you can help them to know what God is really like, they will certainly want to engage with him. And I think we can create the environment for that. I didn't push it on my children, but I legislated for them to be drawn to the light. And then they started asking me questions that opened up opportunities to engage with them. 4 times, I think my youngest daughter said, "Oh, can you pray with me?" And I asked for a mandate and God said no. Because she wanted me to pray with her or help her see or engage or whatever. And she wasn't ready. And eventually, when God said yes, I just led her in an activation with my wife to experience God. And she experienced him in a real tangible way. So you don't have to force or pressurize or manipulate, just love. Love is the best demonstration. Unconditional love is the best demonstration of who God is. And I don't think, religion, and particularly the Christian religion, demonstrates unconditional love very well. Even to its members, it doesn't demonstrate unconditional love, because it's all about conforming to a particular standard of behavior depending on which stream you're in. And some streams will have very different behavioral standards that people have to fit into to be accepted within that stream or group. God doesn't do that with us. His love is unconditional. As soon as you put a condition on it, it's the law. And as soon as you put on a law, then there's consequences, rewards and consequences. The old covenant's ended. There is no law. So we're not under the law, we're under grace. Therefore, God's grace is his divine enabling power to enable us to engage him. And we've asked people to believe in God without ever meeting him. I don't believe that is what God intends. If you read every encounter in the Bible that someone encountered God and believed in him, none of them were blind faith. None of them were told, just believe. They all met him in some way. The disciples didn't just believe in Jesus in some way. They met him. He revealed himself. He engaged with them. And I think faith, we've turned it into, you have to have faith, then you will be able to engage God. And it isn't like that. We live by his faith. His faith enables us to believe. So we encounter, we believe, we're in a relationship. Not try and believe before you've encountered. So let's help people encounter, so the faith is generated by the encounter. I don't want to be walking around living by faith. I want to be walking around living by reality. It's like faith is the substance of things you've not yet seen. I want to see it. I want to live in reality, not hopeful, wishful thinking of what it might be eventually. And in that meantime, I can believe because God says something before I've seen it, but I don't want to live my whole life on wishes that never come to any fulfillment, because that's ultimately not a fulfilled life at all. What God promises, I want to receive. And I believe the promises, even though I haven't received them, but I want to receive them, then I don't need faith, because I've got them. When you live in something, you're not living by what you're trying to get. You're living by what you've already got. And I think the whole thing of faith is in some way, I think, not help people, because the way in which we presented that they need to have faith. Yes, God does reward faith, but it's his faith. Galatians 3:20, it says, I've been crucified with Christ. It's not I who lives, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in this body, I live by the faith of the Son of God. It's been mistranslated to be in. Now, as soon as you live by your faith in the Son of God, then it's up to you to maintain that faith. But if you live by the faith of the Son of God, it's the faith that he has that empowers us, not the other way around. But we've taught it the other way around a lot. And so I think a lot of things change when we really embrace a different perspective of how we're introducing God to people so that they can actually know him for who he really is, rather than how he has been portrayed by religion of all sorts. When love's light shines, then people get drawn to that light and they experience love, and it is life-changing and transformatory. So we need a little bit more of love and light, shining and radiating, so that they can see the light and engage the light, and hey, have their encounters with the reality of who God is. So anyway, here we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I've got a